The sound of a nail gun ripped through the tranquility of the morning. Alex, holding a steaming mug of coffee, watched from his back porch as a crew of workers in bright orange vests drove a line of steel posts into the ground, their rhythmic thuds echoing across the still surface of Lake Haven. A tremor of unease ran through him, but he dismissed it. Probably just a survey or some minor repair. The lake had always been an extension of his own yard, a sacred space where the line between his property and the water blurred into one seamless, wild landscape. His family had lived on this lot for 3 generations. His grandfather, a retired logger, had been one of the first to build here, a small cabin that had since been expanded into a sprawling, rustic home. The HOA was a relatively new invention, born a decade ago to manage the influx of new homes and the sprawling golf course that now bordered the north side of the lake. For years, they'd been a quiet, almost invisible presence. They collected dues, sent out newsletters, and occasionally held a potluck. Alex paid his fees, nodded at the neighbors, and kept to himself. That morning, everything changed. A new figure emerged from a black SUV, a man in a crisp polo shirt with a clipboard and a permanent sneer. David, the new HOA president. David had moved in 6 months ago and immediately set about modernizing the neighborhood. His projects, new landscaping standards, mandatory mailboxes, and a strict color palette for all houses, had been a source of quiet exasperation. But this was different. Alex walked down the gentle slope of his lawn, the dew-kissed grass cool on his bare feet. "Morning, David," he called out, his voice a steady hum against the metallic clatter. "What's the project today? You doing some kind of shoreline cleanup?" David didn't look up from his clipboard. "Good morning, Alex. This isn't a cleanup. We're installing the new lake perimeter fence." The words hit Alex like a physical blow. He stopped cold, the taste of coffee suddenly bitter in his mouth. "Perimeter fence? What are you talking about? You can't put a fence here. This is my property." "The new bylaws were approved 3 weeks ago," David said, his tone annoyingly patient. "The lake is a shared community amenity. To ensure the safety of all residents and protect the integrity of the ecosystem, we have to regulate access." "Regulate access? You mean fence it off from the residents who live on it?" Alex's voice rose, the quiet annoyance giving way to a raw, burning indignation. "My property deed goes right to the high water line. You can't put a fence on my land." David finally looked up, a condescending smirk on his face. "We had the survey done. The fence line runs 5 feet from the high water mark, on HOA property. It's all perfectly legal." He gestured to a barely visible line of spray paint. "The fence will have a locked gate for maintenance access only. The community will access the lake from the new dock and public beach area on the west side." Alex felt his heart pound in his chest, a drum of rising fury. "The west side is half a mile away. My entire property is defined by this lake. My kids grew up swimming here. My dog swims here every morning. This isn't a public park to be fenced off. It's my home." David shrugged, his lack of empathy a chilling counterpoint to Alex's rising panic. "I understand your emotional attachment, Alex, but this is for the good of the community. We have to be consistent." He turned back to the foreman, issuing instructions. "Keep pushing, boys. We want to be done by lunch." Alex stood there, frozen. A fence, a chain-link barrier where his grandfather had taught him to fish, where his father had taught him to skip stones, where he had taught his own children to swim. He watched the workers hammer another post into the earth, their casual efficiency a violation. He turned and stormed back to his house, the manicured HOA property of the new residents feeling like a foreign country. He spent the rest of the morning in a desperate, frantic search. He pulled out the original deed to his property, a brittle document from the 1950s with his grandfather's careful scrawl. He dug through boxes of old records, legal papers, and dusty blueprints. He called his old family lawyer, Mr. Thompson, a man who had known his grandfather and father. "Son, you've got to check the easements." Thompson's gravelly voice crackled over the phone. "HOAs always pull that stunt. They claim an easement for maintenance or access, and suddenly it's a free-for-all. An easement." The word stuck in Alex's mind. He remembered seeing something about it years ago. A document his father had offhandedly mentioned was important. He found it in a leather portfolio, a separate thin sheet of paper stapled to the original deed. It was a detailed drawing, a network of intersecting lines showing the underground infrastructure. The words water main easement were printed next to a thick red line that ran directly beneath his property, just a few feet from the house. He traced the line with his finger, his eyes scanning the notes. A small, almost illegible inscription in the corner caught his attention. It was his grandfather's signature, followed by the year 1968. A separate handwritten note in the margin read, "Agreement with the town. Waterline for the subdivision on our land. Can be terminated with 90 days' notice." His grandfather had granted an easement to the original land developer, who had installed a municipal water line to service the new homes being built on the far side of the lake. When the HOA was formed, the contract had been passed down to them. The HOA's entire water supply for their meticulously landscaped properties, their golf course sprinklers, and their clubhouse amenities ran directly through the core of Alex's land. His grandfather had been a shrewd man. He had seen the future, and he had built a contingency. A slow, chilling smile spread across Alex's face. He knew what he had to do. He spent the next hour online drafting a legal letter. He used the exact language from the easement document, citing the right to terminate. He found the HOA's registered agent and their P.O. box. He printed 2 copies, signed them, and put them in a certified mail envelope. He then drove to the local post office, the heavy envelope a strange, satisfying weight in his hand. When he returned home, the fence was nearly complete, a cold, unyielding scar on the landscape. David was standing by his SUV talking on his phone, a self-satisfied expression on his face. Alex walked directly up to him, the same calm that had filled him on the porch, now replaced by a steel-trap focus. David ended his call and held up a hand. "Look, I know you're upset, but you'll thank me later. This place is going to be a model community." Alex held up the receipt from the post office. "I'm not upset, David. I'm simply exercising my rights." David's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "The original water main easement," Alex said, his voice quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. "The one that brings water from the municipal line across my property to the main distribution hub that services the entire community." David's eyes widened. "We have an easement." "It's perpetual." "No," Alex said, shaking his head. "It was a 90-day renewable contract between my grandfather and the original developer. The contract was transferred to the HOA, and as of this morning, I have officially terminated it. 90 days from now, I'm turning off your water." David stared at him, his mouth agape, the condescending mask of the new president shattering. He looked at the fence, then at Alex, then at the receipt, a dawning horror creeping into his eyes. The fence, his victory, now seemed to mock him, a useless steel line guarding a lake that would be the least of his worries. For a single fleeting moment, the quiet, peaceful air of the neighborhood was shattered not by the noise of a nail gun, but by the silent, crushing weight of karma. Alex simply smiled, turned and walked back into his house, leaving David to stand there, a king surveying his newly fenced kingdom, on the eve of a drought he had just started. The phone in David's hand felt suddenly heavy, a dead weight against his ear. He looked from the post office receipt to the half-built fence, the world around him a dizzying blur of panic. He barked into the phone, "Forget it! It's not a legal matter anymore. It's a logistical problem. We have a problem. A major problem." He hung up and frantically scrolled through his contacts, his thumb hitting the community board group chat. A flurry of frantic messages began. "Emergency meeting. My place. 8 p.m. Now." Inside his pristine, glass-walled modern house, a place Alex thought of as a sterile museum, David paced in front of a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the very lake he had just desecrated. His wife, Julia, a woman who had a habit of always looking worried, watched him from the kitchen island. "What happened, David? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse than a ghost, Julia. Alex. He's a vengeful lunatic. He's threatening to cut off our water." David's voice was a whisper of disbelief. He recounted the confrontation, his story punctuated by frantic gestures. When the board members arrived, a mix of new residents and a few older, more timid neighbors, the air in the room was thick with a mixture of confusion and fear. David held up the crumpled receipt. He's claiming to have a 90-day termination clause on the water main. He sent a legal notice today. Eleanor, the board secretary, a meticulous retired accountant, tapped on her tablet. We don't have a record of that. The easement is listed as perpetual in the transfer documents we received from the developer a decade ago. It's impossible. He said it was his grandfather's deal with the original town, David stammered. Something ancient, pre-HOA. A silence fell over the room. No one had ever thought to question the foundational infrastructure of their community. It was just there. David felt the floor beneath him shift. His perfect, predictable world was suddenly a lie. The next morning, the HOA's lawyer, a slick, corporate-looking man named Richard, called Alex. Mr. Thompson tells me you've made a rather audacious claim, he began, his voice condescending. My claim is supported by a signed and witnessed document from 1968, Alex replied, his voice calm and steady. He was sitting on his porch watching a heron land on the newly fenced shore. The heron didn't care about the fence. It just waded away, indifferent. Alex wished he could be so indifferent. Richard's tone hardened. We've reviewed our files. The easement is perpetual. We will pursue legal action for harassment and breach of contract if you continue with this unfounded threat. My lawyer has copies of everything, Alex said. I'm not threatening. I'm simply providing the required 90-day notice. My grandfather's contract was with the original township, and it was a conditional agreement. The condition was, and I quote, to provide a service to the community's infrastructure, but not to the exclusion of the landowner's property rights. You've excluded my rights. You've put a fence between me and the lake. That's a breach on your end. The termination is valid. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Alex could almost hear Richard's mental gears grinding. He was no longer dealing with a simple dispute over bylaws. He was dealing with a piece of property history, a legal relic he hadn't known existed. The conversation ended with a strained, "We'll be in touch," from Richard. But the threat in his voice was gone, replaced by a cautious, calculating doubt. The community began to split. Whispers turned to arguments. Some neighbors, particularly the older ones, remembered Alex's family and their long history with the land. They saw David's fence as an act of arrogance, a symbol of the new residents' disdain for the old ways. Others, the ones who had bought into David's vision of a premier community, were furious. They accused Alex of being selfish and holding the entire neighborhood hostage over a petty dispute. Alex didn't care. He was a man with a purpose. He started drawing up a new plan. He'd install a bypass valve, reroute the water line for his own use, and cap the main line at the property boundary. He bought a new backhoe and started digging a trench by hand. His son, a teenager named Liam, came out to help, silent and serious. The work was hard, backbreaking, but it was a meditation, a way to channel his rage into something productive. But David wasn't done. He had a few tricks of his own. The next day, Alex received a certified letter from the HOA. It wasn't about the water. It was a fine. A massive one. $5,000 for unapproved construction, citing the trench he was digging for the new pipe. The letter was signed by a unanimous board. It was a clear act of malice, a punitive strike meant to drain his resources and break his will. Alex read the letter, his face impassive. He knew it was coming. He folded it neatly, placed it on his kitchen table, and then walked outside. He watched his son Liam sweat and strain with the shovel. He thought about his grandfather, the man who had the foresight to protect his legacy. He thought about David, sitting in his glass house, watching his kingdom begin to crumble. He went into his garage and returned with a pair of bolt cutters. He walked down the hill to the brand-new fence, the same fence that had started all of this. Without a word, he clipped the padlock on the newly installed gate, the loud snap echoing across the valley. He tossed the lock into the lake. He was done playing their game. He knew what the HOA was trying to do. They were using the fines to try to scare him, to make him back down. But they had miscalculated. The fine for unapproved construction was one thing, but the fine for unauthorized entry into a restricted community amenity was another. He walked back to his house, the sun setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across his lawn and the broken fence. His son looked up confused. "Dad, what are you doing?" he asked. "I'm giving them a choice, son," Alex said, his voice a low rumble. "They can either live with the consequences of their actions, or they can tear down the fence themselves." The following morning, a new notice arrived. This one was hand-delivered by a very nervous-looking David. It wasn't a fine. It was a summons. Not from the HOA, but from a new lawyer. The complaint was from the neighboring golf course. They had discovered that the main water line also serviced their sprinkler system, and without it, their meticulously manicured fairways would turn to dust. They were suing Alex for over $1 million in damages. The stakes had just been raised, from a neighborhood dispute to a financial war that could cost him everything. The summons was not a letter. It was a thick legal packet bound with a brass clasp. The cover sheet, in bold, stark lettering, read, "Complaint for breach of contract and negligence. Damages requested. Won $250,000. Alex held it. The weight of $1 million lawsuit a leaden anchor in his stomach. Liam, who had brought the mail in, was looking at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Dad, what is this?" Alex's mind, which had been running on pure adrenaline and righteous fury, suddenly went cold. He saw David's smug face at the end of the driveway, retreating to his glass house, a smirk on his lips. This wasn't a fine he could ignore. This was a war, and the enemy had just brought in heavy artillery. He sat down at the kitchen table, the packet splayed out before him, and tried to swallow the lump in his throat. "It's the golf course," Alex said, his voice barely a whisper. "They're suing me." Liam's face went pale. "For $1 million, Dad? We don't have $1 million. "I know," Alex said, his hand trembling as he traced the figures on the page. "I know." The fear was a poison seeping into his veins. It wasn't about the principle anymore. This was real. This was a threat to his home, to his family, to everything his grandfather had built. For the first time, he doubted himself. He had been so focused on David, on the small-minded arrogance of the HOA, that he had missed the much larger, more powerful force at play. The phone rang. It was Mr. Thompson. "Alex, I heard about the summons. I just got a call from the golf course's legal team. They're furious. They're suing me, Mr. Thompson, for over $1 million. What do I do?" "You do nothing." "Not yet," the lawyer said, his voice a comforting counterpoint to Alex's panic. "Listen to me, son. David and the HOA are children playing in the sand. This is a corporate titan swinging a hammer, but that hammer is made of glass," Thompson explained. He had been on the phone all morning, digging into the golf course's records. "They don't have a separate easement, Alex. They don't have a direct contract with the town. Their entire water supply is routed through the HOA's lines. And the HOA's lines are on your land, under the terms of that old 90-day contract. Their contract with the HOA is a second-order agreement. It's like a car dealership suing you because you won't sell a car to their supplier." The metaphor was a lifeline. Alex gripped the phone tighter. "So they can't sue me directly?" "They can try," Thompson said with a dry laugh. "But they don't have standing. Their beef is with the HOA, not with you. They're suing you to intimidate you, to force you to back down and make the HOA give them their water back. But if this goes to court, we just have to prove that they have no direct relationship to you or your property." The phone call ended, and a new feeling, more powerful than fear, began to course through Alex. It was a cold, hard anger. They hadn't just tried to bully him. They had tried to bankrupt him. The golf course, with its pristine lawns and perfectly sculpted greens, had used David as a pawn, and now they were using $1 million lawsuit to finish the game. He walked out to the backyard. The sun was setting, and the half-built fence with its broken padlock looked different. It wasn't just a barrier anymore. It was a symbol. It was a line drawn in the sand, and on the other side of that line were not just his neighbors, but a corporate entity that saw him as a mere obstacle to be removed. His phone buzzed. It was a message from David, sent to the entire neighborhood group chat. "Alex has now jeopardized the entire community's water supply and our property values. The golf course is suing him. He is a liability. It's time to vote him out of the neighborhood." The message was followed by a flood of responses, a mix of furious denunciations and panicked questions. Alex looked at the phone, then at Liam, who was standing beside him. The community had chosen its side. There was no going back. He made a decision. He had a few reporter friends from his old life in marketing. He went inside, ignoring the buzzing phone, and sat down at his computer. He composed a press release. It was short to the point, and unapologetically damning local man Alex Thompson faces $1 million lawsuit from the prestigious Lake Haven Golf and Country Club after he rightfully exercised his property rights against a rogue HOA. The lawsuit alleges breach of contract, but internal documents reveal the golf club's own water. Contract is contingent on a decades-old agreement between Mr. Thompson's family and the township. Mr. Thompson alleges the lawsuit is an act of corporate intimidation and a misguided attempt to reclaim what the HOA first took away: his personal access to his family's lake. He attached the documents, the original easement, the HOA's bylaws, and the golf course's summons. He hit send. He was done with private conversations with local spats and angry group chats. He was going to expose the whole mess to the world. The sun finally dipped below the horizon and the lake turned a deep shade of purple and black. Alex, sitting at his computer, felt a sense of calm. He had turned the tables, not just on David and the HOA, but on the real Goliath behind the scenes. This wasn't about offense anymore. It was about principle, and he was going to make them pay for every single inch of that fence. The first blow of the financial war had been struck, and it was loud enough to be heard across the state. The first phone call came at 6:30 a.m. from a local reporter who had a contact at one of Alex's former marketing firms. The second, a few minutes later, was a frantic message from his lawyer, Mr. Thompson. "What in God's name did you do, Alex? My office is getting calls from every news outlet from here to the state capitol." Within hours, the story went viral. The headline was a perfect distillation of the conflict. Lakefront landowner fights HOA tyranny. Golf course sues for $1 million. It was a perfect storm of social media outrage. People who had never heard of Lake Haven were sharing his story. He was a symbol for anyone who had ever felt powerless against a faceless bureaucracy. The press release, with its dry legal details, had been a brilliant move. It didn't just tell a story. It provided the cold, hard proof. Alex watched the news reports, a surreal experience. He saw drone footage of the half-finished fence, an ugly scar on the otherwise idyllic landscape. He watched as a reporter standing outside the HOA clubhouse tried to get a comment from a visibly flustered David. David was a man in the midst of a public relations nightmare. The carefully curated image of the visionary community leader was crumbling in real time. His phone was a constant buzz of angry, anonymous messages. His neighbors, the ones who had cheered him on, were now glaring at him from across their perfectly manicured lawns. A small protest had formed at the end of his driveway, a group of retirees holding hand-painted signs that read, "Let Alex swim and hands off our water." He had gone from being the neighborhood's savior to its most hated man, a position he was entirely unprepared for. The golf course, however, was not so easily flustered. Their initial response was a bland, corporate statement about resolving a complex legal matter and ensuring the continued operation of our community amenities. It was a classic non-apology designed to deflect blame. But the public wasn't buying it. Online forums were filled with threads dissecting the golf course's water usage, their tax records, and the astronomical cost of their sprinklers. The narrative had been set, and they couldn't change it. Alex received an email from the golf course's legal team, not with a summons, but with an offer to mediate. The terms were simple. They would drop the lawsuit if Alex immediately rescinded his water termination notice. There was no mention of the fence, no concession, no apology. It was a thinly veiled act of intimidation, an attempt to get him to back down before the public outcry became a genuine financial problem for them. Alex sent the email straight to Mr. Thompson. Thompson's response was immediate. "This is a good sign. They're running scared. They want to avoid a public fight. We counter. We meet. We demand the fence come down." The mediation meeting was set for a week later in a conference room at a neutral law office. When Alex walked in with Mr. Thompson, the air was thick with palpable tension. David sat across the table, his usual sneer replaced by a gaunt, sickly expression. The HOA's lawyer, Richard, was there, as was the golf course's lead counsel, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman named Ms. Reynolds. Ms. Reynolds began with a sterile, rehearsed speech about mutually beneficial solutions. She laid out their offer, a slightly sweetened version of the email, a small financial settlement, the dropped lawsuit, and a new long-term water contract for Alex's property. Again, no mention of the fence. Alex listened patiently, his hands resting on the table. When she finished, he spoke. "Your offer is predicated on me giving up the one thing I'm fighting for, my right to my property. The fence goes down. That is my only condition. Anything else is a waste of my time, your time, and the public's attention." David's head snapped up. "Are you out of your mind? The fence is staying. The board voted on it. We have a right to—" "Mr. Thompson's grandfather had a right to his property," Alex cut him off, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "And so do I. He also had the foresight to protect his home from the likes of you." Richard, the HOA lawyer, interjected, a bead of sweat on his forehead. "The HOA bylaws grant us the right to a 5-foot easement around the lake. The fence is on our land, is it?" Mr. Thompson leaned forward, a glint in his eye. "I've been doing some more digging, not just into the easement, but into the land deeds themselves. The original surveyor, back in the 60s, made a note on the boundary line between the lake and the property. He sold a 2-foot strip of land directly adjacent to the high water mark to my grandfather, separate from the main parcel. It was an unofficial private agreement, but it was notarized. That's why your survey shows a 5-foot gap. Because you don't own a 5-foot easement. You own a 3-foot easement, and that fence is sitting squarely on my client's land." A stunned silence fell over the room. David's face, already pale, went ashen. Ms. Reynolds stared at Richard, her expression a mix of betrayal and fury. The golf course had been suing Alex for $1 million over a water main that was on land that, in part, didn't even belong to the HOA. The entire fence, the entire conflict, the entire lawsuit was based on a fundamental and catastrophic mistake. The fence was not a sign of the HOA's power. It was a monument to their ignorance. The meeting was over. Ms. Reynolds stormed out, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. David was left alone with Richard, a man who now looked like he was about to get fired. The victory was sweeter than Alex had imagined. It wasn't just a legal win. It was a total, irrefutable public humiliation. He had not only defeated them, he had exposed them. And as he walked out of the conference room, he knew the fence was coming down. The question was no longer if, but when. The news of the mediation meeting spread through the community like wildfire. But this time, the narrative was final. The headline that hit the local news was a simple, brutal summary of the facts. HOA's fence on private property, golf course sues over non-existent easement. The public commentary was swift and unforgiving. David was a laughingstock, his carefully crafted persona as a visionary leader completely dismantled. The HOA board, facing a public relations disaster and the very real possibility of a lawsuit from the golf course, scheduled an emergency meeting. The meeting was a formality. David, looking years older, his polo shirt no longer crisp, sat in silence as the board members, one by one, voiced their complete lack of confidence. The motion to remove him as president was unanimous. He resigned on the spot and, in a fit of bitter irony, was immediately handed a $25,000 fine for breach of fiduciary duty, a punitive move to recoup the lawyer's fees and the mounting costs of the debacle. David, for the first time, had been given a taste of his own medicine. A week later, a crew arrived at Lake Haven, not in orange vests, but in work trucks bearing the HOA's official logo. There were no smiles, no polite small talk. They moved with the quiet efficiency of men on a somber task. They pulled down the fence, one panel at a time, the sound of metal on metal, a grim echo of the nail gun that had started the conflict. The process was slow and methodical. Alex watched from his porch, a cup of coffee in his hand. This time there was no anger, no righteous fury, just a quiet, profound sense of peace. He watched as the final post was pulled from the earth, leaving behind a small, muddy crater. The scar on the landscape was gone. The open, seamless connection between his lawn and the lake was restored. The phone rang. It was Ms. Reynolds, the golf course's lawyer. Her tone was no longer cold and corporate, but cool and professional. "Mr. Thompson," she began, "I've been authorized to offer you a new agreement. The golf course wishes to establish a long-term water contract directly with you. We'll pay you a handsome sum annually, far exceeding any fees you've ever paid to the HOA, and in return, we'll need you to guarantee water supply for our fairways." Alex listened, a small smile playing on his lips. "I'm not interested in money, Ms. Reynolds," he said, his voice calm. "My land is not for sale, and neither is the water that runs through it. I want to guarantee that the HOA will never again interfere with my property or my rights. And I want the fence to stay down, forever. We can put that in a legal document." "Mr. Thompson, a permanent, legally binding injunction," Ms. Reynolds said, her voice betraying a hint of relief. "Good," Alex said. "Then we have a deal. Send me the paperwork." The final piece of paper arrived a few days later, a thick packet of contracts and legal guarantees, signed by the golf course and the HOA. Alex, with Mr. Thompson by his side, signed his name with a flourish. The last piece of paper, a testament to his grandfather's foresight and his own stubborn refusal to be intimidated, was now a permanent part of the public record. That evening, Alex walked down to the edge of the lake, his dog running ahead, splashing happily in the cool water. He stood on the shore, his feet in the shallows, the setting sun painting the sky in a blaze of orange and pink. Liam came up beside him, a towel over his shoulder. "The fence is gone, Dad," he said, a note of awe in his voice. "It is," Alex said, a deep sense of satisfaction in his chest. "It is." He looked out at the tranquil water, at the home his family had protected for 3 generations. This wasn't just a lake, it was their legacy. He had won the war, not with brute force, but with a piece of paper, and the best part was they had no idea.